Welcome, everybody, again to the first webinar for Touchpoint of the 2023 calendar year. You might have noticed that we no longer call this "What's the point?" I think we ran out of "What's the point?" questions to ask, and so now we just get straight to the point. And yes, I did work on that one, but we don't have dad jokes, so that's as good as we're going to get today. But joining me today is Becky Gossard, and Becky is with Salem Alliance Church out of Salem, Oregon. For those of you who sat in our panel at Summit, you know what a treat you're in for. Not me, but Becky. But, she will
Thank you.
Yes, she will be sharing some of her best practices around today's topic, which is going to be database cleanliness. But first, let's look at the agenda. So today's topics, we're gonna start by really just trying to understand how do we even recognize if our database needs to be cleaned, and then from there, let's talk about why having a clean or tidy database is important. And then Becky again is going to really go into what her best practices look like, and share those with you. So why don't we go ahead and let's begin with how you can identify whether or not it's time to clean your database. So you might be asking yourself, what is dirty data? How do you even know if data is dirty? And really, the data that we collect on people is used, if you think about it, it's used to report, it's used to group, and it's used to communicate throughout your database. And if you're a Touchpoint user, it'd be throughout Touchpoint. But when we pull reports that contain irrelevant or unnecessary information, that's an indication that it might be time to assess the places in your database that need to be cleaned up. For example, there might be missing data that's restricting your ability to get needed reports. Or maybe someone's name was entered into a system twice. So their attendance could be recorded in one profile while their contribution records are recorded in another. I don't have to tell you why that's a problem. And then, let's kind of go on the other side of the coin and look at involvements or groups or events if you're not in Touchpoint. But, if you have involvements that within the database are active, but in reality, they are not active at your church and haven't been for a long time, if you try to run a search on those involvements, you could end up with very misleading report results. Now, I touched a moment ago on duplicate records. Now, everyone hates duplicate records. I lead our sales team, and I would say 40% of the phone calls that I have ask about how do you guys address duplicate records? Despite everyone's best efforts, duplicate records are going to get created from time to time. It's inevitable. And duplicates can be created by, through the check-in process, during online registration, or even when your new people manager adds a new guest from a welcome card. So the question then is, all right, how does this happen and how do we fix it? Well, typically, when someone has multiple records, it may be due to missing information from one of the records. For example, if you were in Touchpoint, for example, you would know that potential duplicates are automatically flagged or identified based on a first name and a last name. So if the first and last name are the same as someone in the record, it's going to tell you, you can't get around it. But it also is going to have one more factor, and that's going to either be the birth date, the email address, or phone number, or all the above. But within Touchpoint, those things, by mandating those fields, that's one way that you can minimize potential duplicates. And the reality is you can do that within your own database as well. If you mandate certain fields, then you have a level of consistency, and that will help you eliminate duplicate records on the people record side. As I alluded to a moment ago, though, on the other hand, we have involvements or organizations. So let's switch to the next slide. And the way that we can run into that issue there is, or let me just kind of start with an example. What if you needed to identify some volunteer leaders within your church? You got a new organization starting and you want some leaders. So you run a search of who is and isn't currently in a leadership role. If you have inactive involvements at the church that are showing to be active within the database, what's going to happen is you're going to end up missing out on potential leaders because they appear to already be spoken for within the database. So that's why having duplicate involvements can be a problem. So if you've ever gone into your involvement search or event search or group search, if you're not in Touchpoint, Have you looked to see how many active involvements you have? Because my guess is it might be a lot more than are actually being used. And one way that you can avoid the problem is to recycle involvements year after year, rather than starting from scratch for the same purpose. So this is why at Touchpoint anyway, we organize ministries by programs and divisions, and why that's so important. So if you can have your involvements organized in a hierarchy under programs and divisions, that's going to provide you a very clean look at your data within the system, and it's going to make tracking your involvements and the people associated with those involvements a much more effective process. So that's all in conceptual, if you will. Let's now take a look at the real world, and for that, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Becky.
Thanks. Yeah, I have a couple of situations that I can talk about that have been very recent experiences of why what we're talking about matters. So recently, we have a really big volunteer event. It takes a ton of people. We were running check-in the other night. As people registered for this event, like Michael was talking about, they're creating duplicate records. So they already existed in Touchpoint, but through their online registration, they created another one. Well, I got busy. I didn't have time to go through and clean all of those up before we did check-in. All kinds of people, when they were typing their phone number in, trying to be checked in, it said there were no involvements, because one record held the registration data and the other one had the phone number and was their already existing situation. I had to help a lot of people at check-in, and the whole time I was saying, yep, I could have fixed that if I would have cleaned this up ahead of time. Another scenario that just happened to us recently is I needed to send an email to all of the leaders in our database. This ties into the involvement cleanliness. I pulled up everybody who was a leader and I sent an email, and I got replies that said, I haven't been a leader in 3 years. The last time I was leading was 2018. In an active involvement, they were still a member and they were still marked as a leader, which meant they got the email. So this just goes to the real world reasons of why we're cleaning this up, why we're doing this. Let me start with, I am not perfect at this. You could look at my database anytime and there's all kinds of dirty things. There are some good examples for you of both of those things happened honestly within the last month. But these are the kinds of things that have inspired me to create some kind of a maintenance plan, that we at least have a foundation of where we know we want to go and what the areas are that we want to be looking at. Our staff has dozens and dozens of people, many of whom are using Touchpoint daily. We can fix these duplicate records as we find them one at a time. I could go, oh, I remember this one event that I stumbled on. This involvement should be turned off. We haven't done that for 3 years. But when we are talking tens and thousands of people records and thousands of involvements, we can fix them one at a time, but we're never going to make good progress on that if we don't have some sort of system or process or plan on how to clean those things up. And I would say the biggest downside for me in all of these scenarios has been that my staff around me who's using Touchpoint on a daily basis honestly started to lose trust in the fact that if what they were looking at they knew wasn't accurate, or when they pull up a people record, there's 2 different records and they don't actually know which one to use, they lose trust in the system. And any of us who are in the role of managing these databases knows that that's not a good place for us to be. So that's why we made a plan. And I really appreciate this next slide that is called the Becky Gossard Plan. That's the best name we got for it, apparently.
That is a fantastic name.
Okay, now let's get past that one. Okay, so the first thing I want to say is don't stress. This plan for me has been years in the making. All we can do is take one little step at a time. All I want to do is really equip you with the tools that you need to start thinking about how you can implement this for yourself. What are the things that you can do to make your job easier and the job of your staff much easier? So one of the things is definitely to look at just realistic ways to do it. So one suggestion has been focus on cleaning your involvements 1 year, and then focus on cleaning up records another year. I have also found a lot of success with really looking at the season that our church is in. I know that in August and September, when every ministry area is running events and there's registrations and you're joining small groups, I know that there are a ton of duplicate records created in August and September. We need to have a plan that in October, November, those things get cleaned up. I also know that we have big events in February that start registration in December. So you have to just kind of go with what you know works for your church year and thinking strategically about that for the different departments and stuff that are involved. So people records specifically, one of my best tips is to regularly stay on top of the duplicates. I just told you I didn't do that, and I had a little bit of a check-in nightmare on Monday because I didn't do it. Identifying the duplicates, ideally, if you could be, my goal, honestly, is that at the end of the week, there are no duplicate records left. That all of the records, the duplicate records that were added for that week are cleaned up by the end of the week. That means it's not overwhelming the next time that I go to it. And I think that is something I would just say in general. The more often you do these things, you're only talking about cleaning up 20 to 50 records instead of there's 2,000 records that all need something done with them. One of the things that I like to do is look for blanks on people records. We got a first name, but we didn't get a last name. We got a last name, we didn't get a first name. In the end, having that information in our database isn't actually helpful to us. We could never actually reach out to that person. I have staff who like to type in NA, or there's no phone number, there's no email address. We have a name, Joe Smith came, and they have 1 attendance. But the next time Joe Smith comes, how do I know it's actually the same Joe Smith? There could be 7 Joe Smiths. If we don't have any identifying piece of contact information, we have decided that that's not a record that's worthwhile keeping. I have a ton of searches on things like Mrs. prefix that isn't labeled as a male that's Mrs. There's all kinds of children who are 25. We'll get into some of those. There's an actual copy of the plan that we use. But all of those things are things that they eliminate the accuracy of the information that you have there. And so the more regularly and the more frequently we're cleaning those things up, the better off we're going to be.
Hey, Becky, I'm going to interrupt you real quick.
Yep.
In the Q&A, there is a question that came up that apparently once we started the recording,
Yep.
there's some reverberation. One indicated that it's kind of hard to hear you. Just to help us kind of troubleshoot this.
Sorry.
If anyone else is dealing with this, would you just note that in the Q&A? And if you're not dealing with it, actually, I'd love for you to note that as well. That way we know, is it on our end or
how many?
So yeah, I've got one that said sounds fine.
Yep.
Yeah, so it sounds like it's actually pretty good across the board. So for the individual who reached out, I wonder if there might be a connection issue.
Yeah.
So yeah, we'll go ahead and move on.
Look
But
at all
thank you
this
for letting
good.
us know. Yeah.
Good. Okay. So then we go into involvements. Here are some of the things that I regularly look at. So, oh, sorry, I'm getting pop-ups blocking things on my screen here. What is actually happening? So, like I said before, there are involvements. People haven't been leaders for 3 years. Well, there's still people in it. It's still accurate, or it's still active. It's still showing up. One of the things that I have found is that delegation is the key here. So I regularly ask my staff and ministry leaders, take ownership of your events, the events that you have done. We have our programs divided up so they relatively mimic our actual departments. So my student ministries team will take the high school program and the middle school program and the young adults program, and I will ask them, I can't keep track of all the things that are happening around here. I know that this event happens in the fall, but I don't know when it happened, and I don't know when it's over, and I don't know when people should be dropped. So for us, I have really worked to make that a team effort, and asking other departments to sit and look through that the things that they are responsible for are cleaned up, and the data is realistic and it matches what we're actually doing. Another thing that we often deal with is inactive involvements that have check-in turned on. If this is an involvement that also has a schedule and the meeting dates are just automatically generated, sometimes people even have the option on a check-in screen for a meeting that doesn't exist anywhere. Active registrations for events that have passed. I have a great story about this one. Several years ago, I didn't go in and turn off a registration. We pulled it off the webpage, but somebody went to go Google Salem Alliance Church Women's Retreat, pops up an old page with a link. Because I hadn't shut the registration down, this woman paid $300 to go to a women's retreat that happened 2 years ago. And then I had to get finance involved and do refunds. And it was a whole thing, all because I didn't click the little box that says turn off the registration. I learned it the hard way. And then opportunities to reorganize. As we assess this every handful of months, I don't know about you guys, but our church post-COVID has done a lot of morphing. And we've had a lot of changes in which ministries we've continued to do, what are new ministries that are coming up. And we have found we've been able to go in and reorganize the way that we have our programs and divisions divided, the way what's useful to us at the moment might not be the same thing that was the best way to organize it 6 months ago. So all of those things are things that we're looking at on a regular basis. So I already touched on this one a little bit. Lighten the load. This does not have to be all you. Delegate, delegate, delegate. As much as you can, you need the people who are the most hands-on with those involvements, with those people records, to be the ones who are doing the cleanup. Now, they might need some instruction. You might need to say, here are the things that I'd like you to do. When I ask you to clean up an involvement, I just did this with my staff last week. Here are the things that I mean. Make sure the registration is closed. Turn off the self-check-in. Make sure all your members are dropped. You may need to give them some direction, but it really helps when you can spend 15 to 30 minutes in one department cleaning up your stuff, but it's not me as the database administrator sitting for 5 hours trying to look through the whole database. Also assigning due dates. We all know ministry is busy. I don't know any ministry person who's sitting around twiddling their thumbs wondering what they should do next. Put a due date on it. Check back in with people, keep tabs on it. And I would definitely say, do one type of task at a time. This is honestly what derails me the most often. I'll sit down and I'll try to do duplicates, and I'm cleaning up duplicates. And as I'm looking at somebody's people record, I stumble on an involvement that I go, that's from 2 years ago. And then I get distracted by something else. So work on one thing at a time. Focus on, like we suggested before, whether that's you do people records 1 year and involvements the next, or let's say you do people records at Christmas break and you do involvements during the summer. Find a rhythm that works for your ministry year, for your church, for your staff, but do it together. So here's the other thing that I would say has saved me the most time and brought things down to a way less overwhelming of a daunting task. And that was to build the searches. So you can see on the screen here, this is straight from our database. I put a prefix of maintenance on all of the searches that correspond to all of the things that I have written out on this spreadsheet, on our maintenance spreadsheet. As many as you can. If you build a search for it, all you have to do is go to your saved searches, search for maintenance, hit run. This one I can look at and go, ooh, there's 400 people who are labeled as kids, but they're over 22. It's probably time to move them out into their own family. However, what I will say is if you look through those ages, These are relatively recent. There's one 24-year-old, but that means you can see that we've done it in the last couple of years. You're not finding a 30-year-old on there. So when the search is already built for you, I feel like that takes at least half of your mountain away, because it's already there and it's ready for you to go. Sure, you might have to go in and tweak it, but build it for yourself ahead of time. You will thank yourself.
That is such a great idea. I love that one. I'm gonna borrow that in my calls too.
And I will say, preface it with something. So I have started doing that, just general tip with my saved searches.
Mm-hmm.
I do that a lot when I'm working on all the searches headed during promotion season. Promotion, then the title, maintenance, and then the title. I realized every single year we have an annual report that we have to send to our denomination office. I started titling all those searches, annual report. So not rebuilding it every single year. It took me about 5 years of rebuilding it all every year to realize I should do it differently. So there's your tip for the day. Don't go that way for 5 years before you get smart about it. Search regularly. You can see here, again, screenshot from our database, there's one, because we've cleaned them up. There are not lots of people with a last name of unknown. If you do it regularly, and I said this before, you're looking at cleaning up 20 records instead of 400. That makes a difference. That's a 5-minute task instead of a 3-hour task. Help yourself. That's what I'm here to tell you. I want to help you help yourself. Search everything. This is also a screenshot of, there are all kinds of things here. NA address, deceased but still marked in the family. I don't know how clearly you guys can see these things, but I have tons and tons and tons of searches built. You can look at some of these. I haven't run in a long time, but some of them I have. So again, we're just making it less daunting by setting yourself up for success down the road. Admin level cleanup. This one this one's a little more daunting, I will say that, because this isn't you can delegate it to everybody. So those of you who are the primary database administrator, maintainer, whatever you want to call yourself, these are some places that I have found that honestly, after the first year, probably weren't a problem for us. But now that we've been into Touchpoint for almost 7 years, these things are getting really messy and have started taking some regular work, is all I can say. Your saved searches. My tip with that is put them in date order and scroll all the way down to the bottom. If you can find a search that is 3 years old, you probably aren't going to remember that you can go back to it. You're just going to build it new the next time. Look for things that relate to a ministry that doesn't even exist anymore. So looking at your saved searches regularly is something I would recommend. Custom reports, that list also for us tends to get quite long, quite fast. And all that does is slow everybody down, because the custom reports and the saved searches is something that everyone in the database, it's not user role specific. So everyone in the database is looking at the same lists of all these things. Cleaning those up, often the customer reports, I find more than anything, it was a one-time use thing. This is what I needed for this one thing. But you're in the middle of it. You're getting your ministry ready. You need the roster. You got to take attendance. You don't remember to go back and delete it. But if you're looking at it regularly, you're going to go, oh yeah, I don't need that anymore. I don't need that. Team drafts. So team drafts, the email templates are limited to specific roles, or can be limited to specific roles. The best way to say this, anybody who has that role can see your team drafts. So for us, we have a couple of email templates that are available to our whole staff. Those are the more generic ones. Well, those are also the ones then that the executive pastor uses to send out all church emails. There's all kinds of things. When I go into my team drafts, I can honestly tell you there are drafts in there from 2016 for people who are 3 people removed from that position anymore. We don't need to keep those things. When you go look for, hey, somebody on my team just saved this draft that I need to find, it's really muddy when you have email drafts that go back 4, 5, 6, 7 years. Extra values are the same way, and status flags are the same way. I would say to all of those, they're just, as a database administrator, they're things that you need to just be regularly having on your radar. So my plan. This is just a screenshot. I believe that Katie is going to provide this document to anybody who wants it. This is what I have laid out. Check your email account that's getting notifications about the people records. You can see here, I was about to start pointing to my screen, guys. You can't see that if I point to it. I have it broken down by people records. I have it broken down by involvement. I have general reports. And then I've tried to put an ideal for what are we doing weekly? What are the things that we should keep an eye on monthly? What are the things? Obviously, the annual list is long, but those don't even all have to happen at the same time. You could mark off 2 or 3 of them and mark that you did them in January. And then in February, you do the next 3 on the list. Again, I'm just going to keep saying, you have to find what's doable for you. You have to find the rhythms that work in your ministry year. This is just where I started. The other thing that you'll see is I have notes down in the corner. Find a way to archive your programs and divisions that no longer exist. We have programs and divisions that house a lot of involvements, but that ministry doesn't exist anymore. So finding ways to archive. Also archiving people records. I will say that's one of the things that we don't have on here. My goal would be that every month we're running a search to regularly be archiving people who haven't come in a long time. That's something that's not even on there. For me, this plan has been something that we add to regularly as we stumble on things that we go, oh, I had never thought that we need to look at that. But this doesn't have to be daunting. It doesn't have to be huge. Break it into small bunches, delegate it out to your staff, and find a rhythm that works for you. And questions, but I honestly didn't even keep track of, I don't know how much time we have. I don't know if we're supposed to be done at 30 minutes. Maybe it's 45. Probably should have checked that before I just rambled.
You did awesome. That is great.
Y'all can email me questions. Do we have time for questions, Michael?
We do, yes. We actually
great.
have quite a bit of time but not too much time. So that's really good.
Perfect.
So we have a couple of questions here. Let me think. So we're kind of communicating on questions over here. So I haven't read the question, but it sounds like one came up about recycling involvements. So
great question.
And so I don't have the question, but apparently it was, it's already been read. So let me just respond to what I see over here on my notes, that the record of people who were associated with the involvement will still be available. So if you ask that question and that answer makes sense, Haley, can you indicate by chance what that question was, because we now have quite a few questions here.
Mm-hmm.
All right, well, I'll just go through some of the questions. So what would you do if you had, Becky, say a pledge that had been created by someone and then that person unfortunately passes away? Because from my perspective, I think I would remove that pledge. I can't think of why it would still exist, but would there be a reason that you can think of where you would want to keep that in the database?
That's a super great question. Here's the deal. I actually do zero with the finance part of Touchpoint. I do all the other things except for the finance. So I really can't speak to that, but my gut would be the same as yours. If the person has passed away, I would probably delete the pledge. But that is totally just spoken out of very limited knowledge.
Okay. Yeah. Well, and I even asked, not Will, goodness gracious, Andrew, who's our consultant through Slack. He is in a meeting right now, but I think as a consultant, he'd be able to provide a pretty good response on that one as well. Okay. Were you going to say something else, Becky? It sounded like you had an additional thought. Nope. Okay. So let's see here. How old does a record need to be to archive without affecting any metrics? I'm not sure I understand the question. How old does the record need to be?
I do.
Oh, okay, go for it then.
So Heath, I think that part of that would determine on what you're using to run the metrics. So we have made our own determinations as far as how far back do we say, how far back do we look before we say, if there's no activity in any way. I think for us, we said initially we said 3 years. But again, I think you would have to look at the metrics that you have built and see sort of what metrics are you using regularly? And then is archiving people going to mess those up? That's my best general answer without knowing all of the details. But feel free to ask a follow-up to that if I didn't catch it.
I'm going to continue down here. Someone thanked you. This is very, very helpful to them. Someone else said that they love you. Hi. No one's saying they love me, but I'm just throwing that out there. You know, I don't have any issues with that. I just wanted to point it out. Although I will say a senior pastor said hello to me, so he recognized my face. I do have that.
Good job. Good job.
Let's see here. So what is the now we got questions that are
I know they're jumping.
So you're seeing these questions as well. Okay, good.
I am. Yep.
How do you manage business entry records?
Oh, it's tricky. If you don't know there are 2 different record types. There is a people record type and there's a business type. It's not a people, but that does help. And then when I'm doing some of these cleanup searches, I often leave the business. I limit my search to only people records. But there is a difference between a people record and a business record. And there honestly probably is. I haven't even added to this cleanup document a way to go in and clean up, regularly look at the business records. When was the last time they made any kind of contribution? Is this still a business partner that we have? Probably there would be benefit to also archiving those, but haven't gotten there yet.
Well, thank you for that.
Yeah.
Let's see here. When we search for people, does it look through those that are archived as well? That's a great question. I've often wondered it, but never when I was sitting in front of the database to check that.
So it depends on where you're searching. If you're searching in the people search page, there is a drop down that you can choose the record status. Is it an archive record? Is it not archived, or are you looking at both? In Search Builder, the default is that it does not include archived records. So if you want to include the archived people into your search, you have to add, there is a search criteria that's called include archived. Similar to deceased. So deceased are also by default not included in your initial Search Builder, but if you want to include them, you add criteria to include them.
Got it. Okay. So Becky, forgive me for not knowing this off the top of my head. What do you use for your payment? Or let me ask it this way. Do you use anything other than Touchpoint giving for your payment processor? And if you do, does this create any duplicates that any duplicate problems for you?
See, there you're touching finances again. I actually don't know. Okay. I know that we don't. I'm seeing this question about push pay. I don't know the answer. I'm not going to speak to it. I will speak incorrectly.
You got to know our limits, right?
My finance director was supposed to be on this webinar. If you're on there, Penny, feel free to throw an answer in the Q&A, and I'll let them know.
That's awesome. I love it. All right, we're going to keep on heading down here. Let's see here. Here's a good question. So in the meetings tab, is there a limit to how many meetings you can have in there? Because it can get out of control. I'm sure you can imagine if you get 50, 100, that becomes way too many to scroll through. What are your thoughts there?
I think my first question would be, what are you looking for? What are you trying to find there? I don't as far as I'm aware, there's not a limit. That would be an actual touchpoint staff question. But yes, when there are lots and lots of meetings, that is very difficult to scroll through. But I would step back a little bit and say, what's the information that you're trying to get? Because there might be a better way to get that than trying to scroll through the meetings. I would suggest Search Builder if there are specific information about specific meetings that you're trying to go for. So it's kind of a non-answer, but I really would push back to what is it that you're trying to find there? Because you're right, that is too many to scroll through. And I think you might be able to get what you're looking for in a different way than scrolling through that page. Oh, see, Penny's on here. She said,
yeah, I just saw that.
We use transnational, but we are looking at touchpoint giving. So
Yeah.
Penny, we don't have many issues with duplicates related to giving, usually because they've tried to donate. Oh, as a different name. Okay. So no, apparently we don't have many issues with duplicates through giving. And probably if we move to touchpoint giving, that will be even less.
All right, so here's I'm going to just read it as we go. I haven't fully read it yet. Regarding the archived records. Let's see here. I'm not sure if this is a statement or a question. I don't know if it's saying, can you specify in a search to include them, or maybe it's saying you can specify in a search to include them. So would that not affect the metrics, or at least anything that's pulled in that manner?
I mean, I think it's still my kind of non-answer, as far as it really depends on what kind of metrics you're trying to pull. And is there a crossover between your archiving criteria and the criteria that some of your metrics are looking at?
Okay.
I'm just going to keep answering you with non-answers.
There we go. There we go. So we do have one comment from someone using a third-party giving app that said that yes, they are running into duplicate issues because it's a separate giving app. So my answer to you is simple: touchpoint giving. So let's continue on. I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
But it would help.
It might actually. But no, that is probably a good question. If you're running into that, it is a good question to take up with your consultants, because I'm sure there's a way to address it if moving payment processors is not an option. So something to look into. All right.
Oh, on the meetings, you're talking about recycling and reusing old involvements. I have not, because I don't scroll through the meetings tab to find anything, I have not had any issues with continuing to reuse the same involvement for year after year after year after year. Really, where you're going to see the history of the specific meeting attendances is going to be on a person's involvement tab when you're looking at their attendance. That's really where you're going to see the history, and not necessarily on that meetings tab. And I think it goes back to, like, I don't ever foresee a reason for someone to need to scroll and scroll and scroll and scroll through the hundreds of meetings, or find a way to clean that up. Even I don't think there's necessarily a reason to clean that up.
Yeah.
Anybody, any touchpoint person can jump in and disagree if that's inaccurate.
Our touchpoint people are very shy today.
Apparently.
Just saying.
I'm just going to take that as, I guess.
I do want to acknowledge one of our
speaking untruth.
One of our newest Touchpoint partner churches is on and was very complimentary of you, Becky, and the webinar. And I just want to welcome that person. We are so glad that you're jumping into this kind of engagement so early. Yep. I think that's fantastic. Great to see you there. Let's see here. What happens if you get involved in this? And again, this is probably in the business office or finance side of things, but when you try to convert people to a business, is that, well, it looks like actually we are getting a typed answer to that one. Is that something you have personal experience though with, Becky?
I do. Honestly, it's just the business record feature is just hiding a bunch of fields from a record. So there isn't anything. You can switch it back and forth from a people record to a business record as many times as you want. And there's nothing that's lost. It's just things are hidden.
Got it. Okay. All right. That was a wonderful, wonderful line of or list of questions. Let's see.
There's more coming in.
All right. So the question that just came up is more of a kind of an internal support. Will, if you'd be willing to just reach out to that person and mention that you guys can connect offline, that would be awesome. But I do want to thank everybody for their questions. I don't know that we've had such a flow of questions like today. So Becky, I think that is a nice nod to you. Thank you for joining us today. This was awesome.
Absolutely.
And if you don't have any other questions, if you do, please throw it in there quickly. Otherwise, we will look forward to seeing everybody again as we enter into 2023 and kick off the new To The Point